Hi, everybody. My name is Karen Duffy. I am the Executive Director at the Maryland Coalition of Families. Thank you so much for joining me today on this particular topic. And let me go ahead and just share my screen before we get too much further. Okay, so what I'd like to do today is go through this presentation, and as I go through, I invite you to put your questions in the chat. I can't see them at the moment, but certainly, hopefully we'll have time at the end. I timed this out so that we should have time at the end to answer any questions in the chat, or we can just unmute and talk then. I will also preface this presentation by saying that when I submitted it for consideration to the Federation, it was a very different time. It was the winter of this past year. So I don't think too much of this presentation has changed, other than it's just more relevant and more important as we go through sort of what we're currently experiencing with the funding climate as it exists today. I will also say that when I first did this presentation, I thought we were going to be doing a workshop, a 90-minute workshop. So I condensed it because I do want to be sure that while we go through some of the information, we also have time to talk about how to use that information practically in your everyday work so that you can do some of the things that we're going to talk about here today. Okay, so my name is Karen Duffy. I am the Executive Director at MCF. I've been with MCF since 2020. I came as its Chief Program Officer, spent some time doing that, and moved into the Chief Development Officer role where my job was fundraising. And then I was promoted to Deputy Executive Director, where I did some more of that type of stuff. And then just this past summer, I was promoted to Executive Director. I have about 30 years of experience in nonprofit management, and particularly in behavioral health. But what really drew me to MCF's mission is this component of lived experience. I am the mom of a young adult who has autism and bipolar disorder. So though our challenges over the years have changed, it's an ever-changing landscape, much like our funding world is in the nonprofit world. And so being able to bring that lived experience to doing this kind of work is just so important to me, because I think this is really where the rubber meets the road, right? We have to be able to do this work. This work is so important, and we have to help other people see that and then want to fund that. So I can tell you a little bit about MCF very quickly. We were founded in 1999. We're just wrapping up our 25-year anniversary. We were the first statewide provider in Maryland for family peer support services, with over 30 family peer support specialists working in all 24 Maryland jurisdictions. We support parents and caregivers who have a loved one with mental health, substance use, and problem gambling disorder. So we sort of run the gamut there on different types of behavioral health challenges. What I will also tell you, in the interest of full disclosure, because I think that this is really relevant to today's discussion, is that just this year, MCF experienced a pretty significant loss in funding, as I'm sure lots of nonprofit organizations across the state, across the country have done. We're no stranger to that. And it significantly impacted our workforce, our budget, and really made us have to pivot and do some things differently. Some of those things we doing differently would not be my first choice, but we are sort of subject to the funding that we have available for us. But that's what makes this conversation today so much more relevant, because one of the things that I've been trying to do since I got to MCF is this idea of diversifying funding, making sure that all your funding is not coming from one source or one type of source, because when you lose it, it can be really impactful on your organization. And again, we've just been through that this year. And while we've had some success with diversifying our funding and bringing in different types of funders, it's a long process to do that. And so as we've gone through it, we unfortunately had this happen to us before we were really in the kind of position that I would like to have seen MCF in if something like this had to happen. But diversification is incredibly important for long-term sustainability. Before we get started, just I want to be really clear about sort of what I'm talking about here when I say diversified funding, because there's two types of funding streams, really. There's that restricted funding, which is our federal, state, and government contracts. Those local or state or federal government contracts, they are pretty restrictive. They tell you how much you can spend and on what you can spend it, more importantly, what you can't spend it on. And they really have this very tight, narrow scope of work that you're expected to stay within for the entire lifespan of that contract with very little wiggle room. And if you do need to make changes, mid scope of work, it's usually a long process to make those changes. There's also grants that you can get that are for specific programs and services from other sources, foundations, corporate social responsibility outfits. And when you have a contract that is specifically designed to say, we're going to do this type of work or we're going to run this kind of program, those can be pretty restrictive as well. The unrestricted is a little bit more nebulous and quite honestly, a lot of times a lot harder to obtain, but it is just as important as a source of balancing out that restricted funding. So these are all the things that, people donate to your organization or you do a fundraising event, and that's money that they give to your organization because they just appreciate the work that you do. They're not telling you how to spend it. They're saying, here's some money, now go spend it and put it towards what you think is most important in your organization. Some foundations offer general operating awards as well. Those are fewer and further between and a lot harder to get. There's also corporate giving. I mentioned corporate social responsibility divisions of large corporations. There's many of those. You have to sometimes go digging for them, but you can find them. And then also workplace giving, right? So we'll talk a little bit about more all of that as we go through this presentation today. But I draw this distinction between restricted and unrestricted because you don't want too much of either type. You need a nice healthy balance. There's no prescriptive, this percentage should be this. It's dependent on you, your work, the security of the funding that you have, the resources you have to go out and get the other type of funding that you need. And that's something that each nonprofit organization has to figure out for themselves. But at the end of the day, having a healthy balance between those two, whatever healthy means, is so critical to long-term sustainability. So why do we diversify, right? And we've talked about this a little bit already. It really reduces your risk when you have multiple sources of funding. When we lost our funding this year, I did not have another source of funding to save the jobs that were lost because of that funding. I had to lay off a good portion of our organization staff. And that hurt a lot, both the organization, both me as its leader, the rest of my staff. I know our board felt it pretty hard. And so when you have a diversified funding portfolio, you can supplement or you can switch out funding sources when you lose one source of funding. Now, what we lost was pretty significant. I'm not sure that even if we had a much more diversified portfolio, if we would have been able to save all the jobs, but we certainly would have been able to save probably some more. It also, having diversification also allows you a lot more flexibility and agility. We had a circumstance this, not last fiscal year, but the one before, where as we were doing the work, more and more work was coming to us and we were bringing more and more families on board. We needed to expand our referral and intake team. And most of that work at the time was funded by a government contract. So to go to the government contract monitor and say, hey, we're seeing this need. We want to be sure we're serving families, efficiently and effectively and getting them connected to services as soon as possible. We'd like to add this position. That was like a 6-month process just to get them to approve that. Now, at the time, I did have other funding where I could at least bring that other referral specialist on staff while I waited for the government to catch up with my request to move some of the funding around. But we only could do that. We could only make that sort of adjustment while we waited for them to catch up because we had diversified funding that said, this is unrestricted, use it in the best way you think is necessary. And that's exactly what we did. It also allows you to make a lot more autonomous decisions. If I have to go to a funder, especially a government contract funder, to ask permission to do every single thing, because I'm so reliant on that source of funding, it really slows down in the process, and it also keeps you from being able to pivot so that you can meet those emerging trending issues that you see in your community. A lot of times, we're seeing this a lot right now with the impact to SNAP benefits on a lot of our families. We need to pivot a little bit to the work that we're doing. It's now more about helping people secure food, and less really about all the other things that we're there to support the family with, because we have to pivot to meet those emerging and urgent needs of our families. However, diversification comes with lots of challenges. It's great to have multiple sources of funding. MCF right now has about 23 different funders, 23 different contracts of varying amounts. However, it also means that you have 23 different organizations looking over your shoulder, watching what you're doing. There's a lot more administrative costs. The more diversified you get, the more staffing you need. I have one staff person who's entirely dedicated just to responding to funder reporting. That's all she does. And when we get new contracts, she processes them, and then she does all the funder reporting, all the data collection, all of those things. I need more than just her. So I'm pulling in other people to help, but it is an incredible amount of administrative oversight and overhead that comes along with having lots and lots of contracts. It also means more data tracking. You would think that most funders want to know the same thing, right? How many people did you serve and how well did you do it? But sometimes we get funders who want something just slightly different than what everybody else wants. And so now we find we're collecting a new set of data points. I always use the example of age ranges. I don't know why funders can't all just get together and decide that this is what we talk about when we want to know the ages of people served. Because some of our funders want to, they want to know from birth to 5, and then 6 to 12. And then other people want to know birth to 3, 4 to 10, 11 to, and it gets really confusing. And it means we have to really spend time. And that's just a little example. We have other examples of really big things that only one little teeny funder wants to know, but we have to collect the data and report it. So much more reporting, because the other piece of it is not every funder wants a monthly report or a quarterly report or even a semi-annual report, right? Some of them want all of those things. They all want something different, and it's a different timeline. So you really need somebody who can manage that from start to finish and keep track of it and stay on top of it, because of course, compliance with your funders is what's going to keep that funding continuing. And like I mentioned, more oversight. Now you have 23 contract monitors looking over your shoulder, asking you what you're doing, how's it going, how can we help, how can we be a part of this, which is great. But it's just that many more relationships that have to be managed. So if fundraising and diversification are so important, why don't we do more of it? Right? Some of it has to do with what I just talked about, right? All those obstacles, all those extra additional burdens that come with having a diversified funding portfolio. But it's also just about time, right? Like, we have a very small but mighty development team. But as I mentioned, they spend a lot of their time working with existing funders and making sure that they're taken care of. The time to cultivate new partnerships, new funders, new relationships is really, really tight. And so it tends to be one of those things that gets pushed to the back burner. I literally have Friday blocked off on my schedule every week to devote to just this sort of thing. And I can tell you, out of the last 3 months, I maybe have spent the total of one Friday actually doing that kind of work, because it's so easy for other things to cloud that out and push that off of the calendar. It's also about resources, right? Like, do we have the resources we need? The time, the people, the technology that's needed to track all of this information. all of those things are really, really important. And you can find yourself sort of underwater if you don't think ahead about how you're going to plan for those things. Sometimes it's just having the knowledge. Where do you go? How do you find these people? How do I know who wants to give us money and who's going to appreciate the services that we have to offer? And then it also can just be availability. Do these funders exist that want to fund our work? And I know in some parts of Maryland, you know, we're a pretty big state, believe it or not, and it's very different from one end to the other. And in some parts of the state, there's really nobody there that has the funding or the interest or the resources to help us do this work. And it's just the way that it is. It's just funding deserts throughout the state, and that's not unusual. We have very few outside of government. We have very few funders that are interested in funding the entire state. Most of them want to fund a certain region, and most of that is like the middle of our state. So far western Maryland and the Eastern Shore, they typically have less funding opportunities, which makes it really difficult to figure out how we're going to diversify for services in those areas. But your typical types of funding diversification options, right? Foundations, individuals, corporations, and then of course government. This is pretty much the whole universe of opportunities, although within each one of these areas, there's lots of different variations in the types of folks that offer funding. Just going to go through government really quickly because I think we probably all know this one. I think a lot of us probably, I know MCF was born from a contract with the state government, and that continues to this day. But you do have federal, state, county, and city and jurisdictional funding. Right now, in the current world we live in, federal funding, obviously, everybody knows, is unreliable and uncertain. We have a very little bit of federal funding, just tiny, teeny bit, and that's part of, we're subbed on larger contracts with federal funding. But it's a worry, right? It's a concern for us because that funding goes away, entire positions would have to be cut. And here in Maryland, we have most of our government contracts are state. And here in Maryland, we are facing a significant budget shortfall. We have since last year. I don't expect the next year or two is going to be any better. So we're seeing funding cuts across the board. And it's scary. And when the state cuts their money, so do county and local jurisdictions, because a lot of their money is funneled from the state. So you just start to see this sort of trickle down effect of these budgetary crunches just hitting people in different ways and at different levels. But it eventually is going to come down to the nonprofit organizations that are all vying for the same funding from these entities. Government funding is great. It's usually probably one of the most reliable, solid base of support that you can get. And they have the ability to fill a lot of gaps and serve certain jurisdictional needs that maybe other funders aren't interested in filling. But at the same time, these are taxpayer dollars, so there's a lot of accountability. There's certainly higher expectations, reporting, oversight, as it should be, right? Our tax dollars at work. We want to be sure that we're being good stewards of the money because some of it's our own money, right? We're all taxpayers. There's a lot of administrative support for the reporting, the data collection, and a lot of government contracts don't want to pay for that level of support. They will pay for direct services and supervision of services and program expenses. But once you start moving away and you get into like HR personnel and our grants and contract management and that sort of thing, all the financial back office stuff, they start to shy away from that. They want you to charge that as indirect, but then they don't even let you charge nearly enough to cover what it actually costs. Obviously, as with any other funder, they have limited availability. And my experience, at least here in Maryland, is they struggle to keep up with inflation. So as we go through every year, we try to give raises, we try to give cost of living adjustments, and that can be hard if the government is not keeping up with the pace of inflation. So Government aside, because they're very restrictive, let's talk a little bit about some of these less restrictive options that we have before us. So foundations, those private foundations, they're either family foundations, community foundations, but they are basically people who have money that want to put it to good use. The nice thing about getting money from a foundation is that they are required by virtue of their tax status with the IRS to distribute a certain amount of money every year to charitable organizations. So you know that they're going to have to give out at least a certain amount of money. They have to, or else they can't keep their tax status as a foundation. The other nice thing about foundations is when you sort of start to work with them, whether you're funded yet or not, they offer a lot of really great opportunities to network and partner with other organizations. Because foundations primarily are in the business of solving problems. And so they don't want to be the only source of the only solution, right? So they often bring together and convene other organizations that are the answers to the problems that are they're trying to tackle. And so it's a great opportunity to meet other organizations, to find new partnerships, to find new ways of doing things, which can be really energizing and exciting. And I mentioned earlier, some foundations will offer general operating support. But I see this go in waves. It used to be the big thing. All foundations started to realize, wow, some organizations just need money to keep the lights on. Let's just give general operating. And then now there seems to be a pullback from that, where they want to go back to specific funding specific programs and services. However, like I said, not all foundations are in the business of funding organizations long term. They want to see your sustainability plan. That's their primary thing. We're going to give you money, but you're going to have to tell us what you're going to do when that money is gone. Because they don't want to fund something for a year, 2 years, and then just have it go away. Again, they're in the business of solving problems. So they want to see that you have a plan to replace their money when the time comes. They often have very specific focus areas and more requests than they can meet. It seems to me every time I get a rejection from a foundation, it's because they had more requests than they can meet, which sounds like a line, but it's also true. And so, especially for us here in Maryland, a lot of our private foundations are focused not only on certain priorities, but on certain areas of the state. So it makes it really difficult for us to always be able to ask for funding if we don't meet those priorities or those geographic restrictions. The best way to sort of get in with a foundation is to build relationships with their program officers, really understand. I mean, certainly you can go to a foundation's website, find something you think that matches your work, is worthy of submitting an application, and get funded. That happens. That happens a lot. But a better way to sort of think about it is to also spend some time getting to know that foundation, their priorities, see what else they've been doing in the community, and get to know their project officers or their program officers. Build that relationship. So when your grant application does come across their desk, they're already going to know that you've invested that time, effort, and energy in really getting to understand what it is they're trying to do with the funding that they have available. Relationships are key when it comes to fundraising strategies around foundations. But you also want to be sure that you thoroughly understand their priorities, which are often on their website, or again, just getting to know them and talking with them, because they do get so many requests that they are looking for people who speak to their specific priorities. So you need to be able to draw that through line from what you do to what they're willing to fund. And it has to be very clear. Again, they're in the business of problem solving. So how are you going to solve the problem that they're seeking to address? You have to be able to be very clear and then also be able to demonstrate how you're going to measure that. How are you going to prove basically that you made the impact that they were funding you to make? So that means a lot of key data, a lot of outcomes that you're going to have to be very clear about, and they're going to have to be measurable outcomes. And then, of course, that plan for sustainability through other funding sources is going to be key if you hope to have a successful funding application get approved. Where can you find foundations? They're everywhere. I'm still amazed when I get onto some of these websites, like foundations that I've never heard of in my life. They're just popping up all the time. The foundation directory, Candid, online is probably the most comprehensive database for foundations. It's also the most expensive. So typically what I've seen happen is a lot of local libraries will get a subscription and you can go in and to the library and use their subscription. Here in Maryland, we have Maryland Nonprofits. It's sort of our representative trade association, if you will, for nonprofits. They have a subscription that we as members are allowed to access. And it's comprehensive and it's great, but so are Grant Station and Grant Watch. There's these much more economical, user-friendly online resources that you can sign up for, where you can just research different nonprofits. You can put in search criteria, what you're looking for, what you do, jurisdictional, that sort of thing, and it'll spit back at you some options that you have. And then usually it'll direct you to the foundation's website to learn more. And the foundation's website is a great place to go. Usually they have their 990s, their tax forms on the website, so you can see how much they've given, who they've given to. Because one of the key points is when if you're making your first ask to a foundation, you want to be sure that you're not asking for too much and they just kind of laugh you out the door. But you also don't want to ask for too little if there's more money that they might be willing to put towards this. So you have to do some research into what their priorities are, what they funded before, and generally how much. And all of that can be found on their website and in their 990s. I like to go to other nonprofit organizations' websites to see, if they do generally the same kind of work we do, who's funding them. It's public knowledge. I mean, even if they didn't put it on their website, you could still find it through various tax forms. But it's also just a quick way to realize who's interested in doing and funding the kind of work that you're doing. And it can sometimes be a shortcut just to be like, okay, I already know they funded this group over here. We do a lot of the same stuff. This might be a worthwhile endeavor to pursue this funding. And of course, Google. I mean, Google's always a great option. You're just going to get lots and lots of results that you're going to have to filter through to see what makes sense. Outside of foundations, our next best option, usually, probably the best option, maybe not even the next best, is individual giving. Donors are a key part of any nonprofit's ability to raise unrestricted funding. These are people that are looking to fund you because they believe in what you do. Maybe they're a service recipient, maybe they just know somebody who is, maybe your mission just resonates with them. I think in our field in particular, we all know that most people have been impacted one way or another by somebody they love having a behavioral health challenge, and people can identify with that. People can really understand why it's important that we're doing the work that we're doing to support the family. And so you'll find, if you can make the argument, that you'll find you'll have these folks wanting to give however much they can to support your organization. The trick to that, though, is once you have folks starting to give, you can't just assume that they're always going to give. You have to stay connected with them. You have to understand what it is. Why did they give in the first place? What was it about your mission that attracted them? And this requires a lot of touch points, and not just when you're asking for money. So this is the part that I know a lot of people who do fundraising, are like, oh, I don't want to ask for money. But really, at the end of the day, you're not. You're just finding out from that person who they are, why they're attracted to your mission, what made them want to give, understanding them from their personal perspective. Doesn't mean you're going to ask them for more money, but they do appreciate that touch point, that sense of this person cared enough about me to reach out and ask me why I donated to them. The worst thing, and I know I personally hate this too, is I make contributions to nonprofit organizations and I get my thank you note and then I never hear from them again until it's time to give more money, right? Until the end of year giving campaign strikes up again in November. And I get it, it takes a lot of resources to manage this aspect of fundraising, but it's so critical. because believe it or not, individual giving is the primary way nonprofit organizations have that unrestricted money coming in. And I'm going to show you some information on that in just a moment. So your your donors are going to be the folks that are going to be most committed and loyal to you and are going to keep on giving. They're usually inspired by your mission. They also make really great community champions. If you're stewarding your donors really, really well, they're going to go out there and they're going to talk about you. They're going to spread the message. They'll spread the word about your services. That can often lead to other opportunities. And a lot of times your donors want to give back in other ways too. Maybe they want to do some volunteer work. Maybe they want to serve on an advisory council or participate in a focus group, serve on your board of directors. Whatever the case may be, you can usually cultivate your donors to help out besides monetarily. And donors appreciate that, right? Because you don't just see them as a dollar sign. If you say, hey, we want to invite you in, we want you to see the work in action, would you mind helping out with this event? That's a great touch point, and it's also a great way to keep a donor feeling engaged and not just like an ATM machine. But it takes a lot of effort to do this. Not just to cultivate the donor and get them to make the donation, but also to keep that donation or to keep that donor engaged with you. You just have to constantly be finding ways to connect with them throughout the year. For example, we are about to launch our annual impact report. And what I do every year is I send a sneak preview, and I call it that, to all the folks that have donated to us in the past. It makes them feel special. I don't ask them for any money when I do it. I just say, here, this is what your donation made possible last year. You get a sneak preview because you were one of the folks that contributed, and I just leave it at that. Because it's just a touch point. I'm not trying to get more money out of them, but I want them to know that I see them and that because of them, this work in our impact report was possible. It's just a lot of work though. And this is probably why, as nonprofit organizations, we know it's important. We just don't always have the energy and effort to make it happen the way that it should. And we certainly don't have the resources or the people power all the time to make it happen. I know that's one of the things that we're struggling with right now at MCF. But again, relationships are important. So there's some low-hanging fruit type things that you can do just to both cultivate and steward your donors. Start with your board of directors. Your board of directors should all be giving contributions to the organization, no matter how small, whatever's meaningful to them. But they also know people that can, maybe might want to know more about your organization and make contributions. So they should be introducing their networks to you. You want to be sure that you thank your donors immediately so that they know you acknowledge their gift and you thank them, and usually a personal thank you. I always try to write a handwritten note to everybody who donates to MCF, just because I think it means something to have a nice note that isn't just a form letter that, here's your tax receipt so you can claim this on your tax report next year. Again, showing gratitude and recognition often to your donors, sharing your meaningful stories with them throughout the year. It is a great idea to just reach out to your donors and say, here's this amazing story. We just had to share it with you. And then that's it. You don't have to ask for a dime. You don't have to do anything, but it's keeping them connected to the work and letting them know that you hear and see them, that they were part of making all of this work happen. When you're asking, it's always good to sort of say, this is how we're going to use your money. This is what your money will go to do. We have a campaign where we have a little receipt because all of our services are free. So we show a little receipt and it says, emotional support, $0, and, connection to vital resources, $0. And it's just, it shows this receipt, but then it also shows how their contribution helped us make that possible, because we don't charge our families for any of the services that we provide. So without their donations, that probably wouldn't be possible. You want to be sure that you're always providing other ways to get and stay involved besides just giving money. We do an annual family day in Annapolis. I invite all of our donors down there to see the work in action. Any other events that you have going on, it's just a really great way to keep them connected and then to show them that their involvement with your organization makes a difference and what it actually makes happen for the families that we support. So where do you find your individual donors? I mean, again, I start with my board of directors. They have vast networks. That's why they're on our board of directors. And they know lots of people. And even if all they do is just share information about our organization, maybe they forward on our monthly newsletter to their networks. That's great. That puts us in front of people we might not otherwise reach. Friends and family, I mentioned at the top, I've been doing nonprofit work for 30 years. Everybody in my friend network and in my family knows that I'm going to expect them to make a contribution to whatever nonprofit I work for at the time. And so just drawing on that network of people that I know. Certainly families that you've supported, people that you've supported in the past might be willing to make a contribution, and it doesn't have to be thousands of dollars. You know, it's whatever's meaningful to that person. If that's $5, that's great. Because to me, that means that's what you could afford, but you wanted to show your gratitude or appreciation for the mission of the organization. We always have a strong social media presence, so we're constantly in front of people who we're serving, or maybe people that haven't encountered us before, don't know quite what we do. But it's always a great way to stay in front of people so that when we do make an ask, it doesn't come out of left field and people already have a sense of who we are and what we do. And I mentioned our monthly newsletter. It's another great way to stay in front of people, just to remind them that we're here. That's where we share our stories. That's where we talk about the amazing work that we do. It doesn't always come with an ask, but when the ask finally does come, there's context for it. There's an understanding of what we do, and people are more inclined to think about giving at that point. And then corporations. My experience in the last in the last year really has been, I see a retraction in corporate support because there's a lot of uncertainty for-profit businesses as well. So it's been a little tricky, but certainly asking a corporation for a sponsorship for an event. I mentioned our family day in Annapolis, where we take families down to the state capitol to advocate with the legislators. We ask folks to sponsor that event. You know, it's an expensive event, busing 200 people in from across Maryland down to Annapolis. And so a lot of corporations are happy to do that because we're going to give them credit. We're going to shout them out on social media. We're going to put them in our newsletter. Depending on their level of sponsorship, we might do something with them at the actual event, right? So companies are always looking for ways to look good to their customers and to their own employees. So any opportunity you can to give them that chance, they're going to hopefully take you up on it. But even if they don't want to provide like a sponsorship, sometimes they'll just do gifts in kind. You know, we might ask a corporation to help us. We have to provide water for the event in Annapolis every year. So, hey, just send me some cartons of water, some of those cases of water, and I'd be happy with that. Then there's also the corporate social responsibility programs that a lot of companies offer. It's usually a separate entity that's connected to the corporation, but it's a nonprofit and they give out grants. A lot of times they're tied to their business model. So for example, most of the time, for example, banks, if you go to their corporate social responsibility arm, they usually want you to ask for money relative to financial literacy, that sort of thing. But that's okay. I mean, if you can make it work, if you can make that connection, that's a great way to get money out of corporations. And then also employee matching programs. I have a board member who contributes from her paycheck to MCF, and then her company matches it 100% at the end of every year. There's lots of programs out that like that. I ask all of our staff to think about who in their family or in their networks might work at such a corporation, and I ask them to consider identifying MCF as the beneficiary of their corporate giving, especially if there's a match. The nice thing about corporations is you get access to lots of new audiences. Because they usually have a much larger marketing effort, and they're going to market to their audience that they gave to MCF. They're going to want to show that they're this benevolent organization or this company that is giving to nonprofits and supporting the local community. That's great. They can market that all they want because that puts our name out there in the community. The other nice thing is that you can also often get other types of opportunities for support that aren't necessarily monetary. At my last job, we were tied very closely with a defense contractor because of the nature of the work that we did. They gave financially to us every year, but they also gave us a lot of support with mentoring. Um, they provided a lot of volunteers for our events. I remember when I first started doing press type activities for that organization, they let me spend some time with their public information officer, and I got some media training through that. All priceless kinds of things to have in our back pocket. And that all just came because we had this great relationship with them. The only problem to corporate giving is sometimes you need people on the inside to sort of steward your request, shepherd it through the process. They want to know that you know somebody in their company. A lot of times their giving is limited to a geographic region that they serve. So you really have to be familiar with not only their priorities, but where are their offices, so that if you want to ask them for support for, especially for an event, that you can say, and this is happening in your backyard, so you probably really want to support this. And the other sort of thing you have to watch out for is corporate practices, making sure that they are acting ethically and responsibly as corporations, and that nothing bad is going to come out in the news. I mean, sometimes you can't obviously anticipate that, but you want to be sure that your organization's image isn't tarnished should something go wrong at the corporation. I'll go back to that defense contractor that I was mentioning, and how they give us media training and all this other stuff. About a year or two after I left there, they got into some trouble with their ability to make airplanes that would stay in the air. I know who I'm talking about. And we sort of had to back off of that a little bit because they were taking a lot of heat. They were also taking a lot of heat, so they stopped giving because they really couldn't afford to anymore. But those are the kinds of things you have to be really, really cautious about. You want to align yourself with an upstanding corporation so that you aren't tarnished by association. These are, again, all about relationships. You're going to see throughout this whole thing that having relationships with people who are in these corporations is really, really key. Again, using your board of directors, appeal to their selfish side, make them look good, right? They're going to want to look good. They're going to look like they're this really, connected, sensitive, empathetic corporation, because people don't always have such a great view of big corporations. And so they're going to be looking for opportunities to show their softer side. Start local and then move up. If they're a national organization, just be visible wherever they are. Make sure that they see you too, so that if they're really focused on serving a certain geographic region, they know that you're part of that region. And again, sell your reputation and your impact. Talk about the numbers of people that you can reach, the people that you serve, the differences you make in your community, because they're going to want to associate themselves with that too. Okay, and then that just becomes a mutually beneficial relationship. Finding corporate donors is a little bit harder. Again, I always start with my board of directors because they know a lot of people. But just chambers of commerce often do networking events where you can go and just talk to different people about what you do. And sometimes it's a bust. And sometimes you find somebody that's really interested in what you do and wanting to learn more. And then usually you can set up a meeting after that to discuss it more. Go to people's websites, think about who's your popular local community businesses, local chain businesses. How can you capitalize on their presence in the community to sort of draw a connection between what you do and what it is they're trying to accomplish? Benevity is another great place. It's free. And so if you go on to Benevity's website, it's a company that connects corporations with nonprofits. So they can go and they can search, their employees can search for nonprofits they might want to designate gifts to. And then a lot of times those corporations will match it. But Benevity sort of serves as a link to link nonprofits with corporations. And it's pretty easy to maintain and it's free to join. And it's just another outlet that might connect you with people you might not otherwise get to meet. It's important to keep in mind that in 2024, charitable giving totaled almost $600 billion. Charitable giving, $600 billion. So there's a lot of money out there that people can access. And a lot of people are trying to access it. So you have to sort of fight for airspace. But it is definitely a market that you should tap into because it exists and it's huge and it's there. What's interesting when you break down that amount of money is that 66% of it came from individual giving. Now, a big chunk of that is often related to people who are giving to their faith-based organizations as part of their annual giving, but not all of it. A lot of people are giving to organizations where they feel connected to the mission somehow. So you have to find ways to help people understand what you do and connect to your mission. Foundations and corporations came in next, and then bequests. Lots of people leaving nonprofit organizations in their legacy giving as part of their will or their estate. I always find that a really morbid conversation. I had to have that conversation with a board member at my last organization. It was really uncomfortable. But if people are really tied to your mission and they want to make sure that, you continue to have their support after they're gone, it can be a worthwhile conversation to have. So general fundraising strategies. First and foremost, you need to be able to state your case clearly. Why should they give you money above anybody else that they might give their money to? So that's why you need to know what their priorities are, the problems that you solve, your ability to be able to pull data to say this is the impact we had last year or whenever on people that used our services. And you need to have that information at your fingertips. So developing that elevator speech, 60-second elevator speech is so important because in these networking events or any other place that you might be, that might be all you get. It's just 60 seconds to talk about who you are, what you do, and why somebody should give to you. So practice that a lot and fine tune it as you need to. And then before you even get out there to start thinking about this, start thinking about your approach. Understand where is it you need to diversify? What type of funding do you currently have? And what do you need to sort of make sure that you are in fact diversifying? And then what resources do you need to do that? Whether that's human resources or monetary or technological, whatever that might be. And what are your short and medium and long range steps needed? What can you do right now with what you've got available to you? What can you do in the medium term? And then long term, where do you hope to be when you have a thriving, functioning giving program, a set of diversified funding portfolio that is helping to keep the organization going? And then plan it out and write it down. So that's where I'd like to spend just the last few minutes of our time together. And I want to try and make sure I leave time, but this part is really important for those of you that have been, doing this work for a while. You know the old adage, if you didn't write it down, it didn't happen. Well, this is sort of a twist on that. If you don't write it down, chances are it's not going to happen. Okay, so planning things out is really important. I write a fundraising plan every year that tells my board of directors and my staff and other interested people what we need to do to raise the money we need for the coming year and what all of those plans are going to look like. And we spell it out from the very start of the fiscal year. We hit the ground running. Having a fundraising plan is critical. It tells your internal stakeholders, that's your board, your leadership team, your development department, even your staff who are doing the services, it tells them that you've put thought into what are the needs, what are our priorities, What do we have going for us? And what do we need to think about might be a threat or a liability to the organization? It also provides accountability. It's like what I said, right? You don't write it down, it probably won't happen. If you write it down, you've at least started the process of building in some accountability, and setting those expectations both for you and for anybody else that you're going to ask to help support execution of the plan. And it helps you think about that long-term sustainability. Where are we right now? Where do we need to get to? What's our horizon for that? How long are we going to give ourselves to get to that point, and start mapping that out? For your external stakeholders, it lets them know that, you're serious about this. You have a plan. You might write your fundraising plan and you probably won't share it outside of your organization. But when you start executing it, you can say, we have this plan. This is our strategy. This is what we want to do. And that tells people that you're not just asking for money, that you have this long-term big vision for how you're going to fund the work that you do over time. And it's responsible budgeting, it's responsible nonprofit management. It just, having that commitment to diversification shows that you understand that nonprofit work is tenuous, and that the best practice for maintaining long-term sustainability is to think about all the different places, all the different sources to get funding from, and then taking the steps actively to secure it. It's very simple. I say that it's very simple, but it's a document I spend like a month writing every year. But the first step is just to know what your need is. What is it you need to fundraise? What are the shortfalls in your budget? What do you need? Know what you currently have committed as your funding sources, and where does that funding come from? What are the sources? Is it diversified? Is it not? If it's not, where do you need to sort of focus your energies? Know what you have available to execute the plan, and what do you still need to make this the kind of fundraising plan that's going to be beneficial for your organization. And then sit down and start drafting. I often share my fundraising plan with my development team and with my board of directors before I finalize it, because everybody's going to want to have their say in how these things are done. So step one, knowing your need, very simple. What are your annual expenses? How much committed funding do you have? The difference between the two is probably going to be your fundraising goal. Even if there is no difference, right? Even if your committed funding covers all your expenses, you still want to be sure that you have a fundraising plan that speaks to diversifying, because any one of those committed funders could go away overnight. And you need to have some contingency plans for that. Step two, knowing your current state of funding. What percent of your committed funding falls into each category? So what percentage of your funding comes from individual giving, corporation, foundation? Understand those relationships, and then think about, for each one of those, what are the risks, the threats, the strengths, and the opportunities. Do that SWOT analysis. We did that this year with all of our, after we lost the funding, I sat down and I did another analysis of all of our remaining funding. And then we talked about, okay, what do we need to do to make this funding secure? Part of that was talking about diversification, and part of that was just strengthening some of the things that we were already doing. But it's really important to understand all the different funding sources and what your opportunities are and what the risks are. And then knowing what resources you have available. So what's worked in the past? What kinds of fundraising efforts or activities have you done in the past? Maybe you haven't done individual giving. Maybe you've done a gala before and you want to think about doing it again. What's worked? What hasn't worked? What worked, but maybe you might want to tweak it for the next year. You never know. Is there an existing donor database? Do you need to create one? I mean, we had very few donors when I came to MCF 5 years ago. We have more. I still don't think we have enough to say that we have adequately diversified that particular funding stream. So that's one of the areas that we focus on pretty regularly. What relationships do you have with foundations and corporations? What can you leverage? Even if that's not to get money from that foundation or that corporation, who can they introduce you to? Who can they connect you with so that you have new opportunities that you might not otherwise have if you didn't leverage those relationships? Think about staff capacity to design and execute these fundraising activities, but also the results of those fundraising activities. Remember what I said earlier, if you get foundation money, it's going to come with more reporting, more data collection, all of those things. So it's also not just what you have on the front end to go out and get the money, it's what do you have on the back end to make sure that you're being good stewards of that money. Think about your board of directors. What role can they play? What do they play? Do you need to have them step up their efforts a little bit? Maybe they're not all giving, for example. That's a great place to start the conversation. Who are your champions outside of the organization? Who loves your story and wants to shout it from the rooftops and would be willing to be, maybe do an interview with that person and have them talk about why they support your mission, and sort of capitalize on that. Think about your timeline for diversification because, things can happen overnight as we're all seeing right now. And think about, are you coming from a position of this is urgent, we got to do this now? Or can we take our time and think about this strategically? Because either way, you're going to need a plan. And then also just think, okay, based on what you've got, based on your available resources, what is feasible? What is realistic right now? What's that low-hanging fruit of things you can do now, versus what you might need to sort of put off until you are in a different situation. And then your plan, very simple. Section 1 is the case statement, who you are, what you do, why people should fund you. What are your organizational goals? That's the know the need. That's just basically how much money are you trying to raise. Think about fundraising goals by source. How much do you want to raise from individual giving? How much do you want to raise from private foundations? Once you figure that out, the next thing is, okay, so if I want to raise X number of dollars from individual giving, how am I going to do that? Am I going to do end of year giving, please? Am I going to engage in Giving Tuesday? Is there another month of the year where I can really capitalize? We like to capitalize on May as Mental Health Awareness Month. We do some fundraising during that time. So what are the fundraising goals by strategy? And then think about individual campaigns and you map the whole plan out. Again, it's probably going to be tweaked. It's a guesstimate in time when you start working, but it's something. Okay, I brought us right up to the last minute of the time that I wanted to talk, but there are supplemental materials that will be coming out. So a list of the resources that I just went through, the template for the fundraising plan that I have used in the past, and a strategic planning worksheet that just sort of asks you some questions and prompts you to think about a few things.